Well, hunting is hunting and hunters are hunters, but gosh, when I was younger, you didn't see a lot of women in the field hunting. Boy, these days it seems like there's one behind every bush, and they're really quite successful, but few of them seem to be as successful as our guest today, Melissa Bachman. Hello, Melissa. Welcome to Ron Spomer Outdoors Podcast. It is a treat to have you on.
Well, thank you for having me. I sure appreciate it.
It's our pleasure. I think my listeners are really going to be interested in finding out a few more details about this woman they see not only on hunting TV, but hunting almost everything and anything with extremely good success. And it's just as amazing. You look to me like a person who does not suffer buck fever and does not miss much.
Well,
And
you
I'm
know what? If they say practice makes perfect, I'm in there. I put a lot of time in, so that
Yeah.
helps.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's perfect advice for everybody. Hey, before we get too deep into this, though, I think there may be one or two people out there who probably don't know about you. So I want to sort of establish your bona fides. I know you've been on several TV programs. Could you kind of run down a little list for us, let you know what you've been up to?
Yeah, my show is called Winchester Deadly Passion. We're in season 15 now, so I've been doing it a very long time. And I've been on many other shows along the way. But that's always been the main one. It airs 52 weeks a year. And when I actually started, I was just a cameraman and did that for a very long time. 4 years, in fact, before I ever had my own show. So I guess that makes it, I've been around for a while. But, I travel all over. I do almost everything on my own. And that's one of the things I think that has always set me aside is I don't have people going out and, whether it's booking the hunts or doing sponsorships, anything like that. I'm a one person show. You get what you see. And I think it really makes it a little different. And my dream since I was a little girl was just to find a way to hunt every single day. That's all I ever wanted to do. And that's been my goal. And now my goal is to try to get more people involved so other people can, get into our outdoor world, learn from it, and get families involved.
Yeah, and that is really great. So one of the things I like about the hand that rocks the cradle, as we always say, for so long it was just a male thing, macho, macho, and we realized eventually that, gosh, if we don't get women involved in this, girlfriends, wives, mothers, grandmothers, because they have such an influence over our children, and that's of course who we need to educate when they're growing up. They need to learn about this sort of thing, and boy, having mom as a hunter in the family, I think really helps. So thanks to you for that and the work you're doing. I know young girls are really coming along and impressed when I go to shows and see you there. There's always a line of little girls waiting for your autograph, and I think that is absolutely great.
Yeah,
But
I love
getting,
it. And you want to have role models for these young girls to look up to, and
yeah,
there's lots of different hunters. I always remind people, not everybody has to be a hardcore hunter. Not everybody has to sit out in the rain and snow. We've got room for everybody and want to welcome everybody into this community.
yeah, great, great attitude. Say, getting back to you as a child, how did you get so interested in hunting and wildlife? I assume your family did it?
Yeah, I was actually really lucky. My mom hunted, my dad hunted, my grandma even hunted. So we had just a long line of hunters. And my parents joke about the fact that the reason they brought us is they didn't want to pay a babysitter, so they just brought us along. And whatever works. And we did it all the time together as a family. And I think there's a lot of families out there right now who are really needing that bonding experience of having something to do together away from cell phones, away from electronics, get back to nature, get out there with your children and learn about them and teach them. And kids are so hungry for that. So I think that's something that's helpful, but I just absolutely loved it. When I was 12, I started hunting nonstop. You had to wait till you were 12 in Minnesota. And even my senior year, I got a work permit from high school. So I didn't have to go to school for the first 2 hours of class every day, so I could bow hunt every morning. So that kind of shows, just the passion and the love I had for it my entire life. And again, my goal was to find a way to hunt for a living. I didn't know how that was going to work. I still remember a professor telling me, yeah, best of luck with that. But it's nice to see and to have things like that work out in the long term.
Yeah, what gave you the idea to try the videography? I know you've told me before that you studied filming and
Mm-hmm.
video work and running the camera and all that, and that's how you got started. Was there anyone in particular who said, "Hey, this is the route you ought to take"? Because when I was growing up and wanting to do this sort of thing, about the only avenue was to get some writing gigs at a magazine, be an editor or write for the magazines. But of course, now with video and social media and everything else, you just jumped right in there at a perfect time. I think. What gave you the
Yeah.
idea?
Yeah, I went to school, so I was either going to do this type of career or be an anesthesiologist. And many times I laughed as I looked at my bank account in the red, thinking I should have just done the anesthesiologist route. But the thing is this is something I truly loved. And I went to school. I either, I knew I wanted to do something with camera work, production. I loved editing things, and I learned a lot along the way. And I was either even looking into sports, like on the NFL sidelines, things like that. But I realized I could combine my passion of hunting with my background in television. So I actually started and I sent out, I believe, 74 resume reels, trying to get my foot in the door, not to be on camera, literally just to be a cameraman or an editor because I had education in both and I couldn't get hired anywhere. So I ended up working for the North American Hunting Club and I worked for them for free for 4 months just to get my foot in the door. They hired me as an unpaid intern. I traveled 150 miles a day back and forth to work for free. But what that did is it showed that dedication and it showed, the love of that I had for hunting, for filming, for all those things. And I got to be surrounded by people who had been doing it for quite a while. And I think that is so invaluable because, you've got people that have real world experience. I did 4 years in college, but that is nothing like learning from people who are doing that every day. So I was very fortunate for many of those guys to kind of take me under their wing, help me. And I was very hungry to work and to, make a difference. And that was my ultimate goal.
Yeah, and it's served you well, obviously. But I think a huge part of your success has to be this work ethic of yours. I don't know anyone else in our industry who seems to work as hard as you. You're out there all the time. You say you're doing 52 shows a year?
Well, I do. I'm on 52 weeks. I've cut it down. It's too many shows for me to be able to do, new episodes. 52 is too much for one person. And I want to have good quality over quantity. So in the beginning, I had a lot more shows. Now I've pared it down to a little bit less, but it's still on 52 weeks a year. And I really want to show people good quality hunts. I want to show them the background. I mean, I'm down here in Illinois right now. We've been out all day hanging stands, getting things set up, putting box blinds out, putting trail cameras out, water holes, licking branches, you name it. We do so much of that work, but I like to show people that, just an average person, we went and rented a tractor from the implement dealer in town, and got some things done. So there's a lot of ways that you can do things if you have the work ethic. It's literally not quitting. And I've always said there's probably thousands of hunters out there who are better than me, but no one's going to outwork me. And that's been kind of my goal all the way through. And I think it's really helped me more than anything else. I tell that to people with any career path they want to go in. That's the easiest way to do it is just work harder than everyone else. And if you never quit, it's pretty hard to get beat.
Yeah, I remember when you first got started and you were working really hard, I thought, man, I think I need to step up my game here because this Melissa's really crushing it, but I can't keep up with you, girl.
Well, you learn to work smarter and not harder. That is the one thing is I do think I found some efficiencies along the way. So there's a lot of room for improvement still. So
Hey, I know folks are going to be wondering, given all the hunting you've done in so many different places, and I've seen clips of you facing bears and all sorts of dangerous game, and I want to go there. But before we get into the excitement of the dangerous game, though, how many species have you hunted? Do you have a pretty fair
I'll be
idea?
honest, I have no idea.
No
I have
idea.
not kept track very well. And, honestly, some of it, I go and I'll try something new, like brown bear, for example. Absolutely love it. I've shot 3 brown bear. But the thing is if you can keep going back, that's a hunt that I'll do over and over. As much as I can afford and as often as I can go, I'm going. So,
Yeah.
there's certain people that are more about the list and getting as many as you can. And I probably could do better at keeping track. But I haven't so far. So I'm not even sure how many I've had, but I know I've had a lot of wonderful memories out there.
Yeah, and that's the important part. Years ago, sat down and thought, wonder what I've all hunted, because people will ask you that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I started running the old memory banks when they were still fairly fresh and I could access them. They're starting to fade out now, but I was adding up all these different species and thought, wow, this is really impressive. I remember I came up with 100 or something different ones, which sounds
Wow.
extravagant, I think, to some
Hmm.
folks to hunt whitetail and maybe an
Absolutely.
elk now and then. But when you're doing this kind of work, you get sent here and there and another place, and you're always looking for something new and exciting to portray. So it really can add up. Maybe it's
Hmm.
easier if you let us know how many different countries you've been to and or states in which you've hunted.
I have no idea on those either.
There either. Good Lord.
No, I'll be honest. I haven't. There's not a whole lot of downtime to just kick back and start tallying up the numbers. So maybe someday, but up until now, no. I mean, I might maybe be able to tell you where I'm going this fall, but beyond that, no
Maybe.
way.
Well, hey, as long as you're cranking it out, being productive, and having fun, really, that's the most important thing. I know when
Absolutely.
folks ask me, what's your favorite hunt? What animal do you like to hunt the most? I can't even answer that because it's not so much the animal, it's the experience. I
And the
think
people.
when folks think, gosh, I'd love to do an elk hunt, it's
Hmm.
probably because they've got some romantic ideas about elk country and what it would be
Hmm.
like to be a mountain man going up into the big
Hmm.
mountains for an elk. That certainly drove me. Then that was my passion. But then you think, oh, maybe a sheep way up in the Arctic mountains. Wouldn't that be really cool? So I think what really drives us is not just the magnificence of the animal, but its habitat, the terrain and the journey to get there. Have you found that to be the case when you're hunting?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll even take it a step further. I think a lot of times it's the people that I hunt with. It's the people that I've met along the way, the people from, maybe the country you're hunting in, their cultures, the things you learn from them. That's one of my favorite things. And, I'm doing a moose hunt this year, and moose are probably maybe my top animal. I absolutely love hunting moose. But the guy I hunt with, he's my favorite person to hunt with in the world. He has more amazing stories than anyone, and I could just skip moose camp and just sit and talk with him. But I think that that's really important for people. I mean, we're humans. You need that connection with people. And it's nice to be out in nature, doing your own thing, but it's really fun to meet and to learn from other people who have more experience in different things. I'm always trying to learn things as we go. I mean, you've hunted 100 species, but you can tell people, you learn from people that you're along with. Sometimes you might learn what not to do. Sometimes you learn what to do. But that is just, you're always learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that harks back to our ancient tradition as hunters, sitting around the campfire telling our tales. I mean, I assume this is why there are cave paintings of all the big game animals in Europe and in South Africa. It's because people have always done this. The excitement of the hunt is retold, and that builds more excitement. I know sometimes I think at least half of my enjoyment of hunting is the reliving of the experience and telling your friends about it. We all know that if we've driven to a camp or hung out with anyone for a length of time, you're always trading stories and saying, "Oh, that reminds me," and then the next story rolls out, and we learn from that, just as you said.
Mm-hmm.
Great
Absolutely. And
observation.
even in families, at our Christmas time, we still tell stories about our first deer hunts together and things that happened in the field. And, those are memories that, again, it's right now, it's hard to be a parent this day and age with all the electronics, everything you've got going on,
Yeah.
and to get everybody outside. And that's why I really think it's important as families. And even if someone's maybe not interested in hunting, still bring them along. Give them a camera. Take them to the range. Shoot.
Oh, yeah.
Do those things together, and I think there's just such a huge benefit in that. Plus, people need more sunshine. They need to get outside more, do a little walking. It's very good for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I have friends and just casual acquaintances who will say, "Hey, Ron, I'd love to go with you sometime." They don't even have a license. They don't care. They just think it's a wonderful adventure to be out, and I have to applaud that
Mm-hmm.
because someone who just goes for the walk, essentially, but they're in the moment and in the excitement, even though they're not the hunter, to fully enjoy and appreciate that, I really recognize that in people, and I think it's a wonderful attribute. So you're
Absolutely.
absolutely right. Just getting outdoors and being a part of it, whether you're the camp cook or you're just setting up the tents and making the fires, as long as you're out in nature and involved in the whole experience, who cares who's got the tag and gets the animal? The whole adventure is for everyone, like you said. Almost
Absolutely.
makes me wish I could grab the grandkids and go out right now and set up a tent.
There you go.
All we need is more time.
Yes, that is true. You figure
Now,
that out. You let me know, or double yourself. I
yeah,
could do
right.
that.
Speaking of time, though, since you said earlier that you do everything, you're filming, you're booking the hunts, you name it, you're doing it all. Gosh, that sounds hard and complicated. Can you give us kind of a quick little synopsis of how you would set up a hunt and then actually do the hunt, start to finish?
Yeah, and it really depends where you're going. Some things that people don't understand is, let's say I go to New Mexico, for example. A lot of that for on an elk hunt is going to be public land hunting. Great, wonderful, love it. The challenge I always run into with the public land hunting are things called film permits, and people don't always know about that. And there's a lot of paperwork that is done behind the scenes that people may not know about. A lot of times they want these in 7-8 months ahead of time, and you don't even know if you drew a tag yet that far ahead of time. So that's some of the challenges. But when I book a hunt, let's say down here in Illinois, my husband and I bought land. We'll try to come down and we'll set trail cameras. We want everything ready to go. So the moment season opens, if we happen to be seeing some big bucks, we are ready to hunt. And I think that's where the preparation comes from, is it's so important, because even if you pay an outfitter, that's really what you're paying for. You're paying for that prep work to be done because you can't always be there. But you got to be able to finish the deal when you get there. So even here, we're doing all these things. We put chairs in, we have all the blinds set. I've got rub posts, water holes, all the things that I like in front of my whitetail setups. And then we just back out. And we just wait until either I have time or we see some cameras that are really getting some big bucks. I'll come back down. But when I come, I'm not doing that legwork during the season. And that's, in my opinion, one of the ways that you can make yourself more efficient, is having things ready ahead of time. Using those summer months, not just being excited about hunting, get out and do something to prepare for it. Also, when I book travel, when I sit down to do a trip, I do everything. I never get up until everything's finished, from having a rental car to the plane tickets to the hotel, whatever I might need. Because what I don't want to happen is get sidetracked halfway, and then we get up there and we're like, oh, shoot, I forgot to get a rental car. And now we don't have a truck to drive because they don't have any trucks in the lot. So I think, you just find efficiencies along the way. And again, it's about people. I book a lot of the same places over and over because I hunt really well with the people there. Maybe it's a landowner, maybe it's a lease, maybe it's a guide, but we do well together. And I think that's also very important, because you want people that you get along well with and that you hunt well with. And there's certain people that, have certain ways of doing things, and that's fine, but it's not always conducive to making television. And so for me, I want people who understand that I am not going to just shoot a buck off camera and just call it good. I'm here to work, to film a show, and it's part of the challenge. I look at it as just one more step that makes it a little more difficult. But when it all comes together, it's just such a great feeling to know you've done every part of it, to get that beautiful footage, maybe from a couple angles. So, when I'm going through, I just take it step by step by step, and every hunt's different, whether it's a lease, public land, private land, but just kind of learning from your mistakes and not doing them twice.
Yeah. Now, a lot of folks are interested in the video work, the camera work. There really seems to be as much interest in cameras as almost as in bows and rifles these days. Can you tell us a little bit about your evolution with cameras? I imagine when you started, there were some pretty big, heavy cameras that you were toting around. What's it like then and compared to now?
I did a couple elk hunts early on, and I am telling you, it was brutal. But the cameras have gotten smaller in size. Our main camera is still pretty decent size, but when you think about it, batteries have also gotten smaller. And the other thing is batteries are more efficient now. So you're getting longer battery life. A lot of the batteries I used to use were probably this big, and they lasted 30 to 35 minutes. Now you're looking at 3.5 hours, and it's half the size. So I think that helps. But also, there's so many people out there with the DSLR now. And, it's just a small camera that you can interchange lenses. And it's really a great way to get some amazing footage. And for people who are interested, now you can use it as a still camera and get photos out there. You can get video. You can have a short lens on and put it in the tree with you. There's just a lot to it. And I think there's something that intrigues people, especially with social media, and just maybe even bringing it back to their family to showcase what they saw. Because you and I both know there's things you see in the field, you're like, no one is ever going to believe this unless I have video of it. And I think that happens to everybody. How many times have you heard people come back to camp and say, oh, I wish I could have had a camera with me. You wouldn't have believed what I saw today. So I think there's, it helps that our cell phones are getting better and can capture some neat footage. But there's a whole nother aspect of the filming side. And it is a really great feeling of the reward when you come back and your footage looks really, really neat. So I think a lot of people enjoy that. And it's just one more way to celebrate the hunt afterwards.
Yeah, excellent. Now that makes me want to ask you, what is the shot that you didn't get? The oh, I wish I'd have had a camera. You probably usually have a camera, but you don't always get the shots. I mean, plenty of times I have my camera and I still miss the shot. Can you recall one or two instances where it was something you wish you had gotten and somehow it didn't happen?
Yeah, I will never forget it. I had, I was still just a cameraman, and I had been out, I was sitting in Illinois on stand all by myself, and I had two of the biggest bucks in my entire life that I will ever see. I believe the one was, I thought he would break the world record typical. I've never seen anything like it, and he was fighting another buck that they ended up killing, I believe, and he was in the 190s. And the one that was beating him up was something you had never, ever, ever seen before. And they were just fighting at like 18 yards in front of me. And it was so amazing that because I was young yet, I just hit record on the camera and I didn't even care if it was filming. My goal was just to shoot this buck. And I got to full draw and I shot at 18 yards. And I sat there for probably an hour and a half thinking that I got him. And I went right underneath of him. And none of it was on camera. I missed the buck. And you joke about not having buck fever. I had it worse than you could ever imagine. And to this day, I mean, they had sheds from him the year before. He was like 207 or something. I mean, it was
Oh,
unbelievable. And nobody ever saw that buck again. It
wow.
looked like a picket fence. I'll never see anything like it. And to know that I had a camera within arm's reach and I was too young and dumb to know, like, this is something you need to film. Looking back, I think it would have been more important to film it than try to get that shot. But again, I was young and I saw those antlers and I said, yeah, I want to get that. So yes, it's easy to remember which one I missed.
Oh my gosh. I mean, you get greedy and you don't get anything.
Yep, that's exactly what happened.
Oh,
And
that
they
is a
always say the
heartbreaker.
biggest ones are the ones that got away, but I'm telling you,
Yeah,
this one was
that
legitimately the
really did
biggest.
happen. Yeah. Well, my story about that pales in comparison. I mean, there are a bunch of them where I wished I'd had that camera, but I remember one in South Dakota years and years ago. It was the night before the season opened, and we had set up the camp and everything. And I thought we'll do a little bit of exploring here and see what's going on. And I had to decide, do I take my 22 250 in case I see a coyote, or should I drag around my big telephoto lens and photograph something? And what are the chances you're going to walk up on something? It's not like I had a blind set up or a feeder or anything that indicated I was going to get an opportunity to photograph. I'd rather grab the rifle. Well, you know what happened. As I'm stepping along through the woods, I come across I think it was a falcon, an immature falcon. I just killed a cottontail, and a mature one came in, and they mantled over it, and they were fighting over that cottontail right in front of me. No camera. The 22
Oh,
250 rifle didn't do me much good.
did you at least find a coyote to shoot?
No, and then I never saw a coyote.
Oh, the worst.
Isn't that the way it goes? Oh,
Yeah.
golly. Now, dangerous game stuff, or even non-dangerous game, maybe a snake, but just anything that hampered you in the field. An exciting story. What can you tell us about one of your most dangerous encounters out there?
One thing that comes to mind is I absolutely love going after alligators. That's something that is so much fun to me because it's more of a social thing, but they're still got an element of danger. They're big. There's just a lot of neat parts. We're in Louisiana and every state is different. Sometimes when I hunt them in Florida, we'll either shoot them with a rifle or we can use archery gear. South Carolina, same type of thing. But in Louisiana, they have to be on a hook first. So we had set all the baits. It's almost like trapping where you go out, get everything ready. As we come up on it, our bait's knocked down. Okay, cool. We're pulling this gator up, and he ended up being way bigger than our John boat. And the guy and I that were doing it, we were not necessarily qualified to be getting an alligator of that size. We were absolutely not qualified. And we got 1,000-pound gator on a line.
Oh,
And all we had is this little 17 is all you could use to dispatch them when they come up. And this gator was just taking it. And I thought, oh my gosh. And he looked at me and he said, if this gator gets in our boat, we both have to bail. And I thought, what have we gotten ourselves into? Like, this is way beyond what we should be doing. And we ended up finally getting it, bringing it to shore, and we actually had to call somebody with a skid steer to get this out because we couldn't even lift it. We couldn't get it in the truck, anything. And we brought it to the meat locker, and they said, we don't get alligators this size around here. And I said, yeah, we just got into it. But they did ask what size boat it was. And it was like way longer than our boat. Like I said, we were not qualified or set up to be getting a gator of this magnitude. But that's one that kind of comes to mind where it can get pretty scary when you've got an alligator on the end of a line and he's trying to get you, your boat, and everything else. Plus, you jump into the water. There's a lot more alligators in there, so I didn't
Oh
think that
my,
was probably the best route.
yikes. I don't have anything that big that bothered me. Oddly enough, Melissa, I think the closest to a death situation or seriously in trouble in the outdoors while I was hunting didn't come from an animal of any kind, or a mosquito. You know, they always say the mosquito is the deadliest animal out there. It's not a bear
Mhm.
or a buffalo or something like that. But mine was simple heat exhaustion. Uh, I was on a sheep hunt in the desert early season and had to cross the river, drop down a canyon, cross the river, up the other side, bumped the sheep. They went back the way I'd come from, so I had to cross the canyon again, but we had to take a big 3-mile loop around and all this stuff, and it was hot, hot, hot. The water was gone by midday. By the time I got that sheep and packed it up to the top and got back to the truck at dusk, I was in serious trouble with heat stroke or not enough water, obviously.
Mhm.
And you can't just guzzle water when you get back to camp with the truck because then you get really sick and you upchuck.
Mhm.
And I was probably on the edge of having heat stroke out there. Hadn't
Oh.
been for my buddy laying me down and putting some wet cloths on me and sort of thing. I just think people overlook the heat possibilities. What do you do to stay hydrated out there?
Yeah, it is something really serious. And I'm always trying to, I spend a lot of days. So I used to spend about 320 days a year out in the field. So that's something that I'm constantly thinking about. And as a hunter, I also want to be aware of how much you have to get down and go to the bathroom, right? That's if you're
Yeah.
sitting in a tree stand, you need to stay hydrated. In fact, when I was a cameraman, I used to not drink at all from like 7 o'clock the night before all day. So that way I never had to be the one to get down and go to the bathroom. That does
Oh,
not work well, as you know.
oh.
You can get dehydrated, you get sick, it's not good for your body. So I actually ended up I looked into it, I did a lot of research, and I started using hoist. They have packets, they have bottles. I've got one right here. They teamed up with Realtree. But what I like about them is they hydrate actually better than water. So what I found is you don't have to drink as much to stay hydrated. And especially with hunting, what's so important is if you don't have to drink quite as much water, it's less trips to the bathroom as well. So
Mhm.
it's really helpful. Like yesterday, we were out all day. We came in and my husband and I, we really like the peach ones as well. They've got peach powder that you just drop in, and we had some water bottles. And there's honestly nothing more quenching to your thirst than having something like that. And I keep them right in my backpack at all times because you never know the situation you're going to get into. And hydration, I mean, that can knock you out like you. I mean, you got to be really careful afterwards because now you're susceptible to it in the future if you get too hot again. I never personally like to rely on a guide or anyone else providing water for me because I always have my own snacks because they don't have enough food, and I always have my own drinks because they may not have enough. And I think it's helpful. Plus, on a sheep hunt, something like that, you want to be cautious on how much you're carrying. So if you can get away with a little bit less water and have it hydrating better, it's all about the absorption rate in your body and being able to keep that. So, I think with hoist, the military uses it. That speaks volumes in my opinion because I don't have the money and the possibility of doing the testing the U.S. military does, but they have contracts with them. So I think it shows, really how well it works. And as hunters, you talk about like a mosquito's deadly, but so can, I mean, you sit out there in antelope blinds all day and didn't bring water. You're on a sheep hunt. You do some of these really far back hunts that you get into a situation you didn't plan on being in. It can be very, very important and maybe something people kind of forget to think about, to be honest.
Well, obviously I did. I mean, I took along as much water as I thought I would need and wanted to carry. As you said, you're sheep
Mhm.
hunting, you're not wanting to carry 20 pounds of water with you. And another
Mhm.
thing is that I find that I just don't enjoy drinking water as much. You
Mhm.
really need to, but it's like, okay, water, and maybe I'll have
Mhm.
some. Whereas a little bit of flavor obviously helps. But I don't like to drink soda pops kind of
Mhm.
things. I don't think that
Mhm.
does me any health benefits. Is this
Probably not.
what'd you call that? Hoist? Like,
Yep. So what it is, so this is a blaze orange that I have here, but I also have packets, and I like the packets because let's say you're out and you like our brown bear hunts. I don't want to bring a case of these in to the field. So what I do is I just bring the small packets, and you just add them to your water bottle that you're already drinking. They
okay,
have peach, they have grape, and tropical punch, I
so
think
it's
as
a
well.
powder mix, like
Yes.
Kool-Aid, only it's got some health
Yeah.
ingredients in it.
Way better. Yep. And it tastes, I can't tell you how good it tastes. It really does taste. I'm a Kool-Aid drinker. I always have been, but these taste as good. But what helps is now you're getting the electrolytes back in your system. You're giving your body what you need, and it's all about absorption. So if someone drinks a bunch of water, a lot of times they're like, oh, it just went right through me. Well, adding the extras that they have in there keeps it into your body and allows your body to absorb it better. And I think that's really important. Plus, if you get dehydrated, it'll hydrate you faster. And that's something that really does help along the way. And, I'm a firm believer in when you're on like a sheep hunt and you start just dragging and getting exhausted, having a little snack and then just pouring some in a water bottle and drinking that, how helpful that can be to not only your mental health, but also your physical strength and really just kind of ramp it up. I think it makes a big difference. And it's something very easy. On our brown bear hunt, we just brought tons of them in there, and they're just small little powder packets, easy to carry. If you're boiling water, you boil your water first, put it in your mug. And then I actually was drinking some of them hot because everyone was giving me grief that I'm the only non-coffee drinker. And when it is very cold, it also can be served warm and is delicious. A lot of people might not know that.
Now, mentioning coffee, I remember another sheep hunt I was on in the Brooks Range, Dull sheep hunt, and we had gone hard all day and finally got a ram, and it was getting toward dusk, and we hadn't had anything to eat all day but blueberries because the guide forgot the food.
See, there you go.
Back to what you said earlier about don't trust your guide. So the
Yeah.
guide forgot the food, and we were starving, and I was going to eat that sheep on the spot. So I was working on getting some meat off the sheep, and I started shaking from not
Yep.
having enough energy and not enough food and everything else. And the guide had a little coffee maker thing in his pack. And I said, hey, bud, I'll work on this sheep if you can make me some coffee. And if you have some sugar in there, I could use that for some quick energy. He did
Yep.
that, and I gulped down that coffee, and man, did that make a difference. So that was one of the things that taught me to have something flavorful along that gets you more interested in drinking because, as I said earlier, I'm just not that interested in drinking water. I have to really be thirsty. And I found that often by the time you really start to feel thirsty, like you really need some water, it's a little bit too late. Your body's system you just can't replenish it quickly enough. So
And
what
and
you're
I
talking
also
about
believe
is
it
more
helps
like
you with snacks.
oh yeah. But what
Yeah.
you're talking about there is more like a sports drink, like Gatorade and stuff with the electrolytes. I've heard about that
Yeah,
for
but
years.
without all that sugar, and that's one of the
Oh,
things that I really like is you don't have all the sugar with it. So it gives you
okay.
all the things necessary. It tastes delicious, but you're not getting all that sugar that's in something like Gatorade. And again, the whole idea with them working with the military, that's huge because they have done so much testing, and it's about being able to replenish that water in your system. And, like I like it. Okay, so let's say a snack or something, but also having that flavor, it just makes your mealtime a little bit better. If you're eating Mountain House every night, there's not a lot of flavor sometimes in some of those freeze-dried foods. So having something that's really good to drink, in my mind, almost serves as like a dessert with it. It helps you in the evenings. Like you said, you're not real big on drinking a lot of just plain water. It helps you stay hydrated in the evening as well. So when you wake up the next day, you're ready to roll because you need to be in the tip top shape. Each one of us do different things or maybe don't do anything to get ready for season, but you want your body to be in the best shape possible. And if you're tired, you're dehydrated, you're not as good as you could be if you were in better hydrated and ready to go.
Yeah. Now, what about the snacks to stay well charged, shall we say? I've been the kind of person I've never been heavy. I've always been pretty small. And my wife always jokes that if I don't have 6 meals a day, I'm going to fall apart. So I always have to have
I
lots of
understand.
snacks and things. But again, when you're hunting, especially backpack hunting, you can't pack along a lot of heavy foods. So I always try to find some nutrient dense things like jerky. It's fairly light because you've dried the meat and it's good protein. So I use jerky. Then I would try, say, apples and cheese. Well, that's heavy stuff. There's a lot of moisture in both of those. What sort of snacks have you found that don't just fill you up with sugar, give you some lasting energy, but don't weigh so much?
Yeah, I think jerky is the number one thing. I use a lot of jerky, and we get a lot made, and I buy some, and it's just really light and it helps you immediately. Another thing I always do personally, if anyone knows you've been in the field, I usually keep some sort of floss in my backpack because if you're eating jerky all day,
Oh,
you can be
yeah.
out there and you'll be like, oh, I can't take this anymore. So that's my little tip if you're always eating jerky.
That's a good one.
But any type of freeze dried, they now make so many different things. They have strawberries. They have all the different fruit that has either been dehydrated or freeze dried. I think both are really nice options. They're very light. And it just gives you, again, it's about having a little flavor because sometimes when you've hiked 15, 16 miles, you're exhausted. Not only do you just need something to get your system going, but it's nice to have a little bit of flavor. Like things taste way better than they normally would. If you'd ate that sheep right on the side of the mountain, everyone jokes that sheep's literally the best thing you can eat. And I often wonder, like, if we're all at the same elevation and you hadn't worked so hard for it, would you still put it at the top of the list? Maybe.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
things taste better. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And I think jerky is a really great option. I even found a company makes some biltong that I found at SCI. And it's literally just like steak, air dried with just salt. And I like things that are very simple like that and kind of finding ways to use my own jerky, my own, meat that we harvest. That way we can just keep it in the freezer, throw it in if needed, and go from there. And it can help you throughout the whole day.
Yeah.
Plus, I
Now,
always keep Skittles too. So there's a
yeah.
little sugar in there.
Oh, little Skittles. Okay. Yeah. My downfall is chocolate. You got to have some chocolate in there somewhere.
There you go.
Now, speaking of simple, let's talk equipment, guns and ammo and scopes and all that stuff. I'm of the KISS principle on hunting. I want my rifles pretty simple, scopes pretty
Mm-hmm.
simple. The fewer things I have to worry about, plug in, use a battery for it, et cetera, the better I'm going to function. What about you? I know you do a lot of bow hunting as well as rifles, but let's just stick with rifles. Most of my audience is interested in firearms. So, what
Mm-hmm.
kind of are your go-tos?
So I'm using most of the time, I'm just using a Winchester XPR. And what I put on it, usually I like the Z6, Swarovski Z6i. The only bells and whistles that I like on any type of thing is the illumination in my optic. I'm a huge believer of having that reticle illuminated. I think it just really helps in the moment of truth to just keep you exactly focused on what you need. But one thing that I do is I don't ever mess with my guns. So I have a 300 Win Mags, what I primarily use. I keep it the same almost always. Very seldom will I make any changes. And I try to keep all my setups with the same thing. So I keep the same optics on it. It's an XPR is usually what I'm using. And I think that helps. The whole idea of keep it simple, stupid, right? I 100% believe in it. And for me, because I also am a bow hunter, I try to get most of my shots close. I think the longest shot I've ever taken on camera in my entire career was probably 300 yards.
Mm-hmm.
Almost everything is 150 yards in it because I'm of the belief that to me, the fun part of hunting is to get as close as I can. I have nothing against people who want to make long range shots, any of that. But for me, I like that challenge of getting in close. So I'm also a believer that if I can keep all my shots 200 and in, I don't need to make a bunch of crazy things on any of my setups. And I know what it does. I can adjust as needed, but very seldomly do I have to make any adjustments because I would rather take my feet and get me closer to that animal. It's better footage. It's more exciting for me. And the results usually speak for themselves. You're inside 200 yards. It's usually a very, very high success rate.
Yeah, and it's pretty obvious if you watch any of your shows that you don't very often go home and eat tag soup. So
I try not to, but
yeah, not having all the fancy scopes with the dialing, this and that, and the other things doesn't seem to be hampering you all that much. So, pretty good advice. But I hear you on that illuminated reticle. My
Mhm,
wife is the same way. She just loves that illuminated
mhm,
reticle. And when she first started crowing about it, I just quite didn't get it.
mhm,
But when I tried some, especially on a dark animal like a black bear or a buffalo, boy, that
mhm.
little red or green dot really does what you said. It helps you focus on that sticking point perfectly. And particularly if you have a scope with the subreticle lines in it, more of a ballistic
Hmm.
reticle style, you
Hmm.
sometimes get so many lines in there, it's easy to get confused if they're all black when that center
Hmm.
dot lights up. Boy, but what about some states that don't allow that? You cannot use an illuminated reticle. To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. What is it they're trying to prove with that?
I've seen that and I don't know because we had the same issue with bow hunting. A lot of states wouldn't allow the lighted knocks, right? And a lighted knock, all that's going to do is tell you where you hit so that way you can make the best decision for recovering that animal. If you
Right.
hit them too far back, you want to wait. You go push that animal. Now you got someone who never found their animal, might, if it's legal, fill another tag. So I'm just a firm believer in, I don't think it's helping in any way, shape, or form. The only thing it's assisting with is finding your game, which should be all of our goal. That if there are things that we can do to make that more successful, I think we should be doing it. I have never understood it. I think sometimes they just make blanket rules or blanket statements just to keep things from having some robot running it and someone sitting in their couch back home, right? Because they're afraid if you allow some battery operated thing, who knows what someone will come up with. And the next thing they know, they've got some machine running their whole gun. Obviously, we don't want that. But I think sometimes that's what it's about, is more of just a blanket statement, worried about technology. And so they just say, that's the rules. Just like for a while, I think Colorado had it, there could be no electronics on your bow. Well, if I've got a GoPro looking back at me, that's not going to help me kill this animal any better. But they just made a blanket statement. So I'd have to remove my GoPro, couldn't have a lighted knock. And finally they realized, okay, that's kind of a goofy rule. Let's get rid of some of these
Yeah.
things. So you're seeing more and more states kind of coming to their senses in my mind. But I understand where they're coming from because you never know what someone's going to make. And all of a sudden you have crazy things going on people's guns, optics, that are not what you ever meant for.
Yeah. Well, there are some really crazy regulations and laws out there, state to state, and a lot of them are contradictory. One state you can do it, the next state you can't. So it's obviously not really about managing wildlife, properly managing the resource. It just kind of comes down to, I don't know, like you said, a blanket judgment against everything rather than well thought out, trying to
Mm-hmm.
micromanage. And I
Mm-hmm.
hear a lot of folks who say Fish and Game ought to outlaw long range shooting. How do you do that? I mean, how do you define long range? And then
I
how do
don't
you
know how
police
you
it?
would. Right. And then also, I've seen, and this is just in my opinion, I've seen people in hunting camps who have no business shooting at 150 yards because they don't know their equipment, they've never practiced, and they just fall apart. Okay.
Yeah.
So, how can you tell me that someone who is a complete mess at 150 yards and another guy who's maybe exactly precise at 450? How can you say one is right and one is wrong?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think on any law, any rule, you always have to know how are you going to enforce it. And if you can't enforce the law, then does it really? I mean, these poor game wardens out there, how are they going to ever understand that? I think that's a huge challenge. And again, I think it's unfair because I've seen people who can make a tighter group at 450 yards than been in camp with a couple, shoot, maybe at 50 they couldn't do that. So you just, unless you're going to do some sort of competence, like see if they're competent enough to make these shots and do an accuracy test, which what are you going to do? Show up to your local Fish and Game and prove yourself with that piece of equipment? And what if you've made a change? It's a very, very slippery slope.
Yeah. I think it makes more sense to educate,
Mm-hmm.
fill people in and not only educate them, but try to direct them towards a different aspect of hunting. It's that, in other words, rather than putting all of your focus on the best equipment to shoot the farthest, why don't you work on your woodsmanship, your stalking skills, your glassing skills, and the rest
Mm-hmm.
of it? We just don't emphasize that enough. And of course, I think I recognize why it's like this is because you can't sell that. You can't build something to sell for $100 that's
Mm-hmm.
going to make you a better stalker. That is a
If they
personal
had it,
development.
they'd be selling it all over.
Yeah, you and I would be talking about it right now. Oh, we are.
So,
But no, honestly, I do think that's probably the best. And some state fish and game agencies, I think, understand that better than others. For instance, in Idaho and South Dakota and I think Montana, at least those three, you can use 22 caliber center fires for big game hunting. And in many states, you can't. Wyoming, for instance, I think the minimum is 24 caliber, like a 243 Winchester. And yet, Montana and Idaho have just as healthy deer and elk populations as Wyoming. What's the problem here? So I think, in some places they'll let you use a 30 carbine that won't put out as much energy as a 22 250, et cetera. There's just all sorts of exceptions to this stuff. But I can understand why they try to set some of these parameters, because they don't want people getting out there and wounding and losing game. I think it's a similar thing with bows. Your hunting bow has to be at least 45-pound pull weight, or maybe 40 or something. Because you don't want somebody going out there with a little kid's bow that the arrow bounces off or doesn't penetrate enough. So,
and even, all those things, there's so many variations, because there's now newer bows that, let's say at 35 pounds, have more downrange energy than someone who has an old bow has 45 pounds that's 20 years old, right? So I think there's just a lot of challenges. Plus, it all comes down to personally knowing what your effective range is. I always try to tell people that you need to figure out, with that setup, with that whole situation, what is your personal effective range? Where can you hit what you need to aim? Because even if it's the biggest buck you ever seen, if it gets up at 300 yards and you don't know where your gun is shooting at 300 yards, in my opinion, you have no business you shouldn't be shooting at it. So I always try to remind people to figure out where that limit is. And if there's an animal beyond that, use your feet to get closer and then be able to make the shot. I think if we all took it upon ourselves, I think we'd be in better shape that way.
Boy, that is excellent advice. And I think a big part of this is self-regulating. When we are thinking, I'm going to go deer hunting and I don't want to miss and screw it up, I'm going to take an adequate rifle. I'm not going to take a 22 rimfire or a 22 Hornet or something that's barely effective. So I don't really think the Fish and Game or government agencies really need to be dabbling into all that stuff. It's just up to us to educate other hunters and ourselves. And as you say, practice, train, learn what you and your equipment both can do, and know your limits.
Yes.
Yeah.
And know your limits in the field, because you may be chasing an elk down and you may be out of breath and you may not be able to get your breathing down, and maybe at the range you can shoot 300 yards no problem. But in that situation where you're on a set of sticks, you're maybe uneven, you're not completely comfortable, you're breathing hard, you need to be able to say, okay, either I need to take a few seconds here and catch my breath, or let's get closer so I have a higher percentage shot. So I think a lot of that really does come down to people know, but they just decide, oh, see, it's a monster. I gotta try, right? Well, how about we try and do a little better for the animals?
Yeah. Who wants to wound a monster?
Nobody.
Yeah. So, Melissa, if you are advising young hunters or even old hunters who are not all that experienced yet, but really love the whole concept, the whole idea of it, and are getting into it, I get asked this quite a bit, and it's all over the map. Which gun should I get? Which cartridge should I get? Which bullet should I use? Which scope should I use? Man, it gets hard to nail this down. What kind of habitat are you hunting in? What are your physical limitations? There are a lot of personal things that I don't know about, you don't know about. But if you're just assuming this is the average person with average skills, but they're willing to work hard and develop them, what would you advise them to pick up for a basic hunting rifle that would be adequate for deer and animals up to the size of, say, elk and moose?
I personally like a Winchester XPR and a 6.8 Western. That's something newer
Western
that came out, and I have been so impressed by the 6.8 Western. I took it on my very first hunt to Montana. I rattled in a buck. I shot him about 80 yards, and I have never in my life seen a blood trail like what I was using there. It just does such a great job, has such minimal recoil, and just an overall, just something I could hand my mom, my grandma, my kids, that I would be comfortable with them shooting. And you also get the range on it. There's just a lot of benefits to it. And I'm always concerned with kids and new hunters about two things: recoil And I'm also concerned about sound, because I think people are afraid of those two things. So a lot of times, if it's legal, I'll put a suppressor on it, and the recoil on the 6.8 is just very minimal, yet you still have all that knockdown power that you need. So that's something I like. And if you live in a state that maybe is a slug zone, so many of them now are getting away from it and allowing you to take either a 350 Legend or a 400 Legend. And we give our kids the 350 Legend all the time for stuff, because there's nothing that I found with the knockdown power of that 350 Legend that has that little of recoil. So there's just so many benefits. So those are kind of my go-to calibers that I would suggest. They're all made in a Winchester XPR. It's an affordable, great shooting gun that can be taken right away, and all the deer season XP ammo works incredible, and you get a lot of options on it. So for me, those are kind of the ones that I usually suggest the most, and that's what we personally use with our kids, my grandma, our own family, my mom, for people who are a little bit more recoil sensitive and don't want those big Magnum cartridges.
Yeah. And in keeping with our keep it simple, stupid philosophy, sounds to me like you're suggesting that would cover everything. But you said you prefer the 300 Win Mag. I assume you
That's for
started hunting with
myself,
that long
yes.
ago.
Yep. I shoot almost everything with a 300 Win Mag. And one of the reasons is, again, I don't like to switch things, right? So if I'm hunting anything from an antelope all the way to a moose, I am covered all the way through, to plains game in Africa. The only time I switch is for Cape Buffalo, some of the bigger game, I'll switch to a 375 H&H or brown bear. But otherwise, that 300, I'm so used to it, and it works great for me. But I'm not maybe as recoil sensitive. I wouldn't want to give that to my mom and say, hey, shoot this with 180 grain ballistic silver tip, and oh, she'd be like, no, what have you done? So I want to be aware of it. But for me, as many different hunts as I'm doing, I like to keep things very simple, always the same, and that's one way I do it.
Yeah. Now, the XPR is a bolt action.
Yes.
Um, have you ever fooled around with lever actions or brake actions, single shots or pumps, any of the
I
rest
have
of them?
some, but not a lot. I really am using that XPR almost always, and I like it too, because I would say I'm kind of hard on things. Things don't always live the best life under my care. They're going to have to be going places, doing things, and we've had I've really put it through some of the worst conditions you could ever imagine, and they always are performing so well for me. And again, I like it because it's a gun that's a easy price point for people to be able to get in, to get started. It's not super expensive, but very, very accurate and a very good gun.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of my listeners are like me in that we're more gun nuts.
Mm-hmm.
And as much sense as it makes to stick with one cartridge and one rifle and be really intimately familiar with it to be successful, I wholeheartedly agree. But we just can't resist buying a different
I get it.
cartridge and a different rifle.
No, it's perfect. I still switch mine up to check them out. Now, I shot that 400 Legend, and I'll be honest, I have never been so impressed. Winchester came out with that last year, and I brought it to Alberta with me. And I shot one of the biggest mule deer I've seen, and I got a full pass through on it at, I think it was right around 280 yards. So, I mean, you're talking very far shots, and now they're legal in a lot of places where straight wall cartridges are allowed. And I think I look at it personally as what a great thing for people, because I grew up in Minnesota where we were in a slug zone. So I always shot shotgun slugs at deer at 12 years old. And it's not that much fun to shoot necessarily as a young little 12-year-old girl shooting a shotgun slug. So I love seeing these agencies who are finally allowing something like the 350 Legend or a 400 Legend to be used, and you're making people more accurate. You still are, losing it at a certain range. A 350 Legend, I wouldn't recommend people shooting super far distances, but for our kids, that's what we have them shoot, because we normally don't let them shoot past 100 yards anyway. It's absolutely perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the slug tradition got started back when centerfire rifles were shooting really far, and people assumed
Mm-hmm.
that would be dangerous.
Yeah.
So stick with a shotgun because what the heck, you're lucky to get 100 yards. But what
Mm-hmm.
they didn't consider was the mass of that slug and how it ricochets. I've seen
Mm-hmm.
some studies that showed that it was much more hazardous and dangerous to have those big, heavy slugs bouncing around than a fairly small, more frangible bullet that would break up and not travel as far. And most of us shooting at deer and other game in the woods, we're going to be aiming that rifle down. It's not going to be at its maximum travel trajectory going 3 to 4 to 7 miles, like
Mhm.
some of the charts say. So I think it's false attempt at safety is what kind of
Mhm.
started this whole thing. But I agree with you. I think these states have figured out that really it hasn't made any difference. I've never noticed any sort of data that said one state right bordering another one has the shotgun slug regulation for safety reasons, and the next door neighbor allows 243s and 270s and all traditional centerfires, and there's no difference in the safety factor. There are no more
Mhm.
injuries and that sort of thing from it. So I think that sort of finding over the decades is educated and is probably contributing to this. But I agree that these straight walls, even though they are not, I think, as effective as the bottleneck cartridges, I don't think there's much difference there. But boy, they really are pretty darned effective. I've tried both the 350 Legend and the 400, and for as tiny as they are with as minimal a recoil, they really do perform remarkably well out to 150, perhaps 200 yards.
Yeah. And, in each one, you got to take into what kind of brush, all the different things that you're dealing with. But let's say if you take a 12-year-old girl and you say, here's a shotgun slug, I'm going to have you shoot, and then here's a 350 Legend. I can tell you they're going to enjoy it more. They're going to be more comfortable with hunting, and they're probably going to be more accurate with it too. So in my opinion, if the safety isn't much difference, I just like seeing companies coming out with, different options, because that's how you keep these kids involved. That's how you get new people involved, is not by handing them something that's going to have too much recoil for what they're comfortable with. They shoot it once at the range and they're like, I don't want to go shoot it again, so
Yeah.
now they're not practicing, or in the field they're scared of it and they're, just getting nervous. I just am always looking for ways to make it a more enjoyable experience for everybody in the field while keeping you effective. So that's
Yeah.
my main thing.
Yeah, and this fear of recoil really makes you ineffective.
Yes.
Ineffective. You've got a 12 gauge slug gun and you're so afraid of it that you end up blinking, closing your eyes, jerking the trigger, and you wound your animal. I'd rather hit him with a 350 Legend.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's what they're finding. And again, I just hope that we can continue finding ways to make people more effective and more comfortable and enjoy their time in the field. Because, no, it's also not a fun experience if you flinch and jerk and miss or wound your animal. Then it could be a bad experience if that was your first time ever going out, something like that. So we really need to try to keep and go out of our way to make it a positive experience for people.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like that's a major mission in your career right
Yeah,
now. You've been at this for like, what, close to 20 years now?
yeah, yeah, that is right.
Yeah. And your focus now seems to be more on youth
Mhm.
education and getting more folks involved in the great outdoors, getting away from their electronic equipment and their cell phones and all the
Mhm.
rest of it. I applaud you for that, Melissa. I think it's really remarkable that you've taken that stance, but not all that surprising, given your passion for the resource. I think most of us who are hunters for many, many, many years have that similar feelings. It
Mhm.
might take a few years of adventure to kind of articulate that. But I think deep down inside, it's what gets us started in the whole program and keeps us going. And we get to a point in our lives where we want to share that joy with others. So I commend you for what you're doing with young folks, especially young girls. It's really refreshing to see them excited about getting out into the great outdoors and sticking their hands in the mud and the worms and the guts and all the real things out there that keep us all going. So
And I
thank you
believe
for
that
that.
word of mouth is the best way. And if you have one child who has a wonderful experience, we try to take new kids from town every year that maybe don't have family that would do it. And then all of a sudden they're going to school and they're telling other kids about it. I mean, I truly believe that word of mouth is the best thing that we can do. And even if the other kids may not ever want to go hunting, it just puts it in a positive light. And I think we need more of that in this world right now.
Excellent advice. Excellent stuff. Well, Melissa, where can folks find you? You've got this TV show. Where does that appear?
So Winchester Deadly Passion airs 5 times a week on Sportsman's Channel year round. It's got a variety of air times, but Sunday mornings at 11:30 a.m. Central Time or Eastern Time is the best place to find it. Otherwise, you can go on melissabachman.com and try to keep everything updated there.
Oh, great. If folks want to contact you and ask you questions, is that permissible and how would they go about it?
Absolutely. So if you go to my website, I just have a contact form and that actually goes straight to my phone. So I try to write back to every single person who has questions, comments, whatever it may be, good, bad, or ugly, I will take them and go from there. And I try to get back to every person and just have a place where people can feel comfortable if they don't want to ask you a question online or for everyone to see. You can always write in. There's no such thing as a dumb question. I'll answer them and let you know my thoughts. And that's all it is, just an opinion, and you can take it from there.
Oh, excellent. Good attitude. Oh, I'm so glad I had this chance to visit with you, and thank you so much for coming on to this podcast. We really appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Melissa Bachman. You can catch her, as she said, on her TV show and get on her website and ask her questions. She sounds like a real ambassador for our sport, and we need more of those. So thank you, Melissa, and to all of you listening. I just remind everyone at the close of these shows to always hunt honest and shoot straight. See you next time.